Welcome to Scrum Masters Elite _UK. Learn how to set high standards, compete with yourself, and grow sustainably. Sign up now.
The first thing that struck me was the calm at the summit. When Erasmus looks down from a position of dominance without fear, many might call it arrogance. But I perceived it as a form of clarity. When you know exactly where you stand, there's no need to feign humility to please others. Honesty in self-assessment, whether high or low, has always been the foundation of sustainable growth. And for me, this is far from easy. In life, I often either underestimate myself out of fear of failure or sometimes overestimate myself without sufficient data. Erasmus seems to have completely eliminated both extremes. I realized an extremely important lesson: the summit is not the most dangerous place, the real danger lies in the lack of challenge. A team strong enough to have no worthy opponents faces the risk of stagnation. This reminded me of myself during easy periods. When everything flows smoothly, I tend to exert less effort, learn less, and inadvertently slow my own progress. The solution War proposes, internal competition, made me think deeply.
Strict, non-negotiable standards, independent of reputation, it is an almost ruthless yet extremely fair system. It removes subjective emotions and replaces them with concrete metrics. It made me question whether, in my personal life, I set such clear standards. Or am I still living by inspiration, mood, or reasonable reasons that are really just a form of complacency? Returning to the Springboks, I could clearly see how Erasmus applies this philosophy to modern rugby. What surprised me was not their talent, but how they treat talent. There is no room for comfort, no guaranteed spot. Past glory does not guarantee preference. Even big names like Malcolm Marx or Bongi Mbonambi must face the reality that today's standard matters more than yesterday's achievements. I feel this is a hard lesson to accept in life. The past does not guarantee the future. What I did well yesterday does not mean I deserve my place today.
In many situations, I still tend to cling to past accomplishments for reassurance. But Erasmus's system does not allow that to exist. Another point that struck me deeply is team depth. When a team can bring in players who have never played professionally into a training camp and still maintain an extremely high level of competition, it speaks not only to talent but to the system itself. I realized that sustainable success never comes from individuals alone, it comes from a well-designed structure. In life, I often focus on improving myself bit by bit, but sometimes I forget to build a system for myself: habits, environment, discipline, and clear standards. Erasmus's willingness to rotate the squad in a major tournament like the Nations Championship also gave me a lot to think about. To outsiders, it may seem risky, but for him, it is a long-term strategy. It reminds me that not every correct decision looks safe in the short term. Some choices only make sense when viewed in the long-term picture. I was also particularly impressed by the idea that the Springboks do not need opponents to get better. They need an internal standard high enough.
This mindset is very different from the way many people, including myself, often operate. We are easily drawn into comparisons: who is better, who is more successful, who is faster. But Erasmus, and before him, War, asks a different question: have we reached the standard we set for ourselves? I feel both admiration and a bit of anxiety. Admiration for witnessing one of the most sophisticated and efficient sports systems. But also anxiety, because when a team becomes too dominant, the competitive nature of the sport could be affected. However, looking deeper, this very dominance forces other teams to evolve, which in the end can elevate the entire sport. The biggest lesson I take for myself is that personal standards must be clearly defined, measurable, and uncompromising, not to be perfect, but to avoid complacency. I need to learn to compete with myself more, rather than constantly comparing myself to others. I also need to build a personal system, where discipline does not depend on mood. Victory does not come solely from talent or luck, but from structure, philosophy, and steadfast adherence to standards. Understanding this allows us to appreciate what happens on the field, rather than just focusing on the final result. What makes me think the most is not how strong the Springboks are, but the question: if I were placed in that system, would I have enough discipline to survive? Perhaps an honest answer to that question is the starting point for my own transformation.
Compete with yourself, build the system, and set clear standards. See you at the top.